Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. With the summer's hot and dry conditions, the wildfire risk continues in many regions of the country. We have an update. The CBC issued its regrets regarding a story involving Premier Daniel Smith and her office allegedly contacting Crown prosecutors via email. And we hear from the director of Project Confederation, who explains why he believes provinces need to do a better job standing up to Ottawa.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Federal Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair offered an update on how wildfires across the country have hit provinces very hard. Blair says with hot and dry conditions expected over the summer in many regions of the country, the wildfire risk will continue.
Drought conditions, when coupled with above normal temperatures across most of the country, means that the risk of fire activity is going to remain very high throughout the majority of the summer. In July, most of Canada, from British Columbia and the north through to the prairies and across the country to Western Labrador, will be at high risk. And as we move into August, while the total area does decrease, especially in Eastern Canada, at-risk areas still are projected to include Western Canada, the North, Ontario, and Western Quebec. As of today, there are 648 wildfires burning, with 339 of those fires designated as currently out of control. To date, there have been 3,415 wildfires nationally, and approximately 8.8 million hectares of land has been burned.
British Columbia's largest wildfire on record continues to burn and is now the size of Prince Edward Island. BC Wildfire Service says the Donny Creek wildfire is over 5,715 square kilometers. The wildfire has charred enough land to make this one of the worst wildfire seasons of all time for the province. Now, this wildfire in particular is located 158 kilometers northwest of Fort St. John. The fire has burned traditional territory of the Blueberry River, Prophet River, and Doig River First Nations. Officials say elders are watching nervously as important cultural resources are being burned. Meanwhile, here in Alberta, the province says there are still 104 active wildfires burning. Emergency officials say 11 are out of control and 39 are being held. Firefighters from across Canada and a number of other countries are helping to battle the blazes, including those from South Africa, who are very happy to help out.
We've met a lot of firefighters, Australian firefighters, Canadian firefighters. It's very nice to work with them. The fires from Canada, they are totally different from South African fires. Mainly the underground fires, they are not familiar with us. Like, we are still acclimatizing with all those diggings, because in South Africa, you normally find the fires on the ground.
Alberta Wildfire says so far this wildfire season, our province has seen 807 wildfires. Vulcan County has declared an agriculture disaster after experiencing very dry and hot conditions, which has affected crops for farmers. An official with the county says the hot weather southern Alberta experienced at the end of May and into early June caused a number of crops to suffer.
Obviously, rain is welcome. I think some of our well water, like our water table's getting pretty low. So, a big dump of rain would certainly be nice. It would help a lot of our trees, our dugouts, our well water. For annual crop production that's not on irrigation, I think, our crops are pretty well done. It would help our pastures. The biggest guys hit, I think, right now are our cow-calf or cattle producers. We have no feed going into the winter. Feed's going to be hard to find.
Hot conditions are expected to continue for the next week, and sadly with no rain in sight. Dave Bishop, the director of the Alberta Wheat Commission and a farmer out of Barons, explained if he's seeing the same dry, hot crop conditions that Vulcan County has been experiencing.
We're at the point where we're probably at best, even if we get some rain, maybe half our normal crop on dry land. If we don't get any rain here within the next week, then it's just going to go downhill. It's not looking very good. I would say our irrigation is good, but the dry land is not, and it's not going to be good. It'll never recover. It's getting too late for a lot of it. If we do get rain, we will get some crop, but if we don't get any rain, we may have nothing on dry land.
Bishop adds that if the dry conditions continue, he could see an infestation of grasshoppers. The counties of Foothill, Stettler, and Paint Earth have also recently declared agricultural disasters. Well, it was another hot summer dry day here in southwestern Alberta. Angela Stewart is in now with an early peek at the forecast. Angela, even though there's a slight chance of showers developing tonight, it may be worth the risk to maybe fire up the barbecue?
Well, we're actually only kind of expected to see about a 30% chance of rain tonight, so we may or may not even get any rain over our city. So it could be a good night, I guess you could say, to get out and do some grilling if you really wanted to. That rain is kind of the last that we're going to see before we shoot up into some really hot, humid temperatures coming into next week and even starting this weekend. Tonight, we're expected to sit at a low of 12 degrees. Tomorrow, like I mentioned, shooting up into those high 20s. 28 expected for our high tomorrow to get our weekend going, and then expected to sit at a low of 12 for tomorrow night. As for how the rest of the week is shaping up, we'll have all those details coming up later in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Angela. CBC News is doing some backpedaling today. The Crown Corporation is retracting a story alleging someone in Alberta Premier Daniel Smith's office emailed Crown prosecutors questioning the handling of cases in relation to the pandemic protests near the Coots border crossing. CBC made the announcement on Wednesday, amending their story from January the 19th. An unsigned editor's note atop of the amended online story reads, "Our sources have insisted the Crown prosecutors felt political pressure regarding the Coots cases, but they were not able to confirm that the emails they originally described were sent directly from the Premier's office to the Crown. As such, we have updated the story, removing references to direct contact between the Premier's office and prosecutors." CBC News regrets reporting direct contact by email. Premier Daniel Smith took to Twitter, where she said she felt vindicated. In her tweet, she also said, "Now that the CBC has expressed regret for its inaccurate reporting and Albertans know the truth, I consider the matter with the CBC closed. Additionally, I'm asking the Alberta NDP to acknowledge their error also and retract and apologize for spreading this misinformation." More help is coming for those who are battling addictions on the Siksika Nation. The Alberta government announced that 11 new recovery communities will be established that will allow for long-term addiction treatment throughout the province. Premier Daniel Smith announced that her government has signed a memorandum of understanding with Siksika Nation. She says the investment will be around $30 million.
This new 75-bed recovery community will provide holistic addiction treatment services for up to 300 people every year. And once the building is complete, Alberta's government will also fully fund the operations of the recovery community so that no person is forced to pay out of pocket for life-saving care. Today's MOU marks a milestone in our government's relationship with Siksika Nation. Developing a recovery community with Siksika Nation and other First Nations is an important step towards increasing access to long-term addiction treatment that meets the needs of First Nations.
Smith adds that similar investments will be made to help build new recovery communities with the Blood Tribe, the Kainai, and Enoch Cree Nation on their lands. The Alberta Federation of Labour says the provincial minister's call for back-to-work legislation forcing striking BC port workers back on the job shows a disregard for workers. The union's president, Gil McGowan, says Minister Devin Tereshan's call to force striking workers back to work shows a lack of understanding of provincial economics. McGowan says the federal government should not interfere with the labour disruption in BC. BC's port strike continues after more than 7,000 workers walked off the job on July the 1st. If you've ever taken a drive out of Lethbridge, you know that the Highway 3 corridor stretches all the way into beautiful British Columbia. Destination Canada has chosen this long patch of highway as part of its Tourism Corridor Strategy Program. It's called the Sustainable Journey from Prairies to Pacific. Aaron Crane, the CEO of Tourism Lethbridge, says this new initiative is key in developing the future of tourism in our region.
Looking at, mid-sized cities and things that are maybe off the regular path, this is where the opportunity sits here within Canada. And it's nice to see that, the federal government is recognizing that and, looking at, promoting those things that really make Canada special, and agriculture and, the Rocky Mountains that we've got, over it heading west into BC through Crow's Nest Pass. All of those are unique to our area and really special, and that's going to make us stand out. And it's nice that they see that as well.
The two other corridors chosen by Destination Canada are the Atlantic Canada UNESCO Tourism Corridor and the Northern Indigenous Tourism Lodge Network through the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Northern British Columbia. The theft of catalytic converters has continued to be a big issue here in our country. The Alberta Motor Association has partnered with local law enforcement and Cal Tire locations across the province to address the issue. Staff with the AMA say that engraving the vehicle identification number, or VIN, onto a catalytic converter will help prevent the theft of the precious metals inside, including platinum, rhodium, and palladium.
The thief will then know that we can track back, law enforcement can track back not only where the catalytic converter came from, but potentially back to the thieves that are stealing these and selling them. So there's no guarantee that this is going to prevent it, but it will act as a deterrent. And it's one step in this process of trying to eliminate this kind of problem.
Officials say a recent survey by the AMA found that only 30% of people think that the theft of a catalytic converter will actually happen to them. The initiative runs until August the 31st. A Lethbridge College student has taken home the title of the best heavy vehicle technician in Canada. Walter Loebman took home gold medals at both Skills Alberta and Skills Canada back in May. He's now gearing up to compete in the heavy vehicle technician category of the World Skills Competition in France next year. Loebman is currently working full-time while he completes his apprenticeship program, and I know he'll do our city very proud. The YMCA says they've been experiencing a bit of a lifeguard shortage. Officials say the shortfall is due to many university students who have come for school and then leave after graduation, along with COVID-19 affecting their courses for lifeguard training.
So having properly trained lifeguards, they're really there to prevent incidences from happening in the first place. So that's why we're asking people to, walk on the pool deck, and then they are there. If something happens, they are able to rescue and have that knowledge so that people have the best results.
Officials say the YMCA is looking to bring on at least 10 more lifeguards. Collaboration and partnerships between provinces are crucial for Canada's success. Now, that's according to Josh Andrus, the Executive Director of Project Confederation. He says the decisions made in Ottawa are not always in the best interests of individual provinces, and there's a need for provincial leaders to unite and fight back.
We've seen provinces push back. Like right now, we're seeing it with in the Maritimes, for example. Atlantic Canada is standing up to the climate agenda because, again, it is about their ability to raise revenues internally. It is about their ability to provide good economic conditions for investors and job creators so that they can build the economy. We're seeing BC start to push back against certain areas in healthcare, right? Ontario has almost liberalized the use of the notwithstanding clause against the Prime Minister's wishes.
Andrus will also explain why he believes the recent Sustainable Jobs Bill, or the Just Transition Act, is poorly planned. He'll share details in an interview with BCN's Naveen Day coming up after Business News. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made it official and said his government will stop advertising on Facebook and Instagram over the tech giants blocking Canadian news content. Meta and Google both said they would yank Canadian news in response to the government's Bill C-18 legislation. It requires those tech giants to pay for Canadian news, which they refuse to do. Trudeau says his government will not back down.
This is not just a dispute over advertising, it's also a dispute over democracy. It's a question of recognizing the role that internet giants like Facebook, Meta, Google, and others have in our lives, and therefore a responsibility that they also wield. As we've said, we're continuing constructive conversations with Google. Unfortunately, Facebook has just refused to recognize any sort of responsibility it might have in contributing to a democracy that has, democracies in general that have contributed to its success as a company, as a corporation.
The wave of shootings during the July 4th holiday in the United States is highlighting challenges police are facing as the summer temperatures continue to rise. The gun violence that flared up this week left more than 12 people dead and around 60 others wounded, including kids as young as the age of 2.
I don't know why you would come to an event that is a family event that has taken place for 10 plus years without incident and ruin this event for those who look to have nothing but a good time.
This country needs to re-examine its conscience and find out how to get guns out of dangerous people's hands.
I wasn't surprised because I've been tracking the data on mass shootings on July 4th going back 10 years. And on average, there are 5 mass shootings on July 4th. So I was anticipating that we'd have a problem this year. And this year is particularly difficult because of the fact that July 4th is on a Tuesday, and many Americans treated July 3rd as a part of the long weekend. So we have basically a 4-day weekend, and celebrations extending over that period of time. And we have tremendously hot weather in this country right now. These things together created a situation where one could anticipate that we'd have the kind of surge of mass shootings that we've seen this year.
Meanwhile, families of the recent mass shootings in Philadelphia gathered together to remember their loved ones. 5 people were killed and 2 others were wounded when a 40-year-old shooter opened fire in a residential area of the city.
I don't understand how someone can just do that to my brother. Like, I really love him. And the fact that you did this to us, like, for your own agenda, for your own reason, it's just really pissing me off. It's really pissing me off, and I'm going to miss him a lot. He taught me a lot about myself. He was like a second father to me. I never wanted to tell anyone that, but he was like a second father to me.
There was a small bicycle, looked like a child's bicycle, which was sitting on that corner. And we were informed by some people who were there that that bicycle was dropped by someone, I presume a child, during the shooting. Hours later, nobody had touched it. Nice little bike. Hours later, nobody had touched it, as if they all felt they couldn't, that it was a memorial. It was some kind of a silent memorial.
Wow. You know, summer camp can be a terrifying experience for young children, especially if it's their first time going. Once they adjust to camp life, however, it's often hard to pull them away. Mason Unruh is the registrar at Crow's Nest Lake Bible Camp. He says that summer camp is especially good for those who battle self-esteem issues.
We have things like rock climbing, where it might be they start and they can't even hold onto the wall, and by the end of the week they're reaching the top of it, or archery, where they're missing the targeting entirely and then they are hitting the bullseye, and this is all supported through staff who want to see young people succeed and who are helping develop that personal self-esteem that some people are lacking or maybe just don't receive.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Mason Unruh from the Crow's Nest Lake Bible Camp and BCN's Naveen Day coming up later in our broadcast. Well, we enjoyed lots of sunshine and warm temperatures across much of southwestern Alberta again today. Make sure you're well hydrated and add lots of sunscreen, for that trend shall continue. Full weather details are on deck. The average temperature for this time of year is around 25 degrees for Lethbridge. We were slightly above that today. Angela Stewart is in now with all of the weather details. Angela, it should remain t-shirt and shorts weather for the rest of the week and into the weekend?
Yeah, that is exactly it. So for the rest of this week and heading into next week will be the best time to bust out your best summer clothes, because it's going to be very hot and humid over the next few days. 28 degrees, that's kind of the start of where we are seeing those the hottest temperatures for the rest of this week. Going to be shooting up into those low 30s for Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, 30, 31, 33. And then mid next week, that's kind of where we're seeing those cooler temperatures, because we're going to be getting a little bit more cloud coverage. Tuesday, Wednesday, 29 and 25. but all around great temperatures. Average high for this time of year is 25, average low is 10. Highest temperature was 34 degrees recorded back in 1975. Lowest temperature was 2 degrees back in 1994. Our sun rose at 5:31 this morning and expected to set at 9:40, so that'll put us at about 16 hours and exactly 9 minutes of daylight. Okay, to temperatures across the country for Friday now. Going to be feeling some winds gusting up to about 40 near the water, so it'll be feeling a little bit cooler. 24 degrees in Vancouver. That mix of sun and cloud is expected there. So for Edmonton and Calgary, there is a risk of a thunderstorm, but about a 30% chance. Otherwise, 25, 26 for Calgary, Edmonton. So a great day, actually, as we kick off the annual Stampede, Calgary Stampede. Saskatchewan, Regina, 23 for both regions, lots of sunshine. Winnipeg, risk of a thunderstorm, low 20s kind of expected there. That's kind of going to be their last little bit of cool off because they've been very hot and humid over the last couple of weeks. When we're looking at central Canada, Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto, they are all under a heat warning. So when we're talking about a heat warning, that's kind of when we need to keep in mind lots of sunscreen, lots of water, take lots of breaks if you can. They're going to be feeling some reprieve, hopefully, as they head into next week when cooler temperatures and a little bit more cloud coverage is expected. Atlantic Canada is also kind of feeling that same thing. They're all under a heat warning, except for St. John's, which is the only region where some moisture could be expected. But Fredericton, Halifax, and Charlottetown under a heat warning, risk of a thunderstorm in some areas, but it's not likely that that will happen. And that is a look at your full weather forecast.
Stats Canada is reporting a $3.4 billion trade deficit for May. That compares with a revised surplus of $894 million in April. It is the largest trade deficit since October of 2020, as exports fell 3.8% to $61.5 billion for the month. Exports of energy products were down 7.3% in May. That was largely due to lower prices. Imports, meanwhile, were up 3% in May to $65 billion. Deloitte Canada is forecasting a modest increase in oil prices over the next few months. A recent report by the firm says lower supply will start to drain global crude inventories. The study also says production cuts by Russia and Saudi Arabia should help prop up prices despite weaker demand. The cuts include Saudi Arabia's recent announcement of an additional reduction of 1 million barrels a day. Canadian Pacific Kansas City says it has placed temporary embargoes on export traffic to the Port of Vancouver as a strike at BC Port sees no sign of a breakthrough. Officials at the rail company says it's closely monitoring developments and is in communication with customers about the strike, which is now in its 6th day. Officials are calling for a swift resolution to protect North American supply chains and Canada's economy. Talks between the BC Maritime Employers Association and the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Canada remain deadlocked over maintenance issues. More than 7,000 workers walked off the job at 30 ports across British Columbia. The employers are asking for the dispute to go to binding arbitration. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 293 points on the day to finish at 19,810. The Dow was down 366 points to 33,922. The S&P 500 was down 35 on the day to 4411, and the Nasdaq was down 112 points to 13,679. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 9 cents to 71.88 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 2 cents to 2.63 US. Gold was down 4.52 on the day to 19.1078 US an ounce, and silver was down 39 cents to 22.72 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.15 per bushel, barley's at $9.12, canola's at $17.41, and corn is at $9.98 per bushel. Live cattle were down 38 cents at $174.58. That's for the August contract. Feeder cattle August contract was down $2.43 to $242.28. And lean hogs were down $1.23 to $100.05. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 74.80 US. Recapping one of our top stories, federal government officials offered a countrywide wildfire update today. Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair says there are currently 648 wildfires burning in Canada, with 339 categorized as out of control. The wildfire season has seen 3,415 wildfires across the country, with around 8.8 million hectares of land burned. Close to 4,600 Canadians remain evacuated. There's a real appetite for Alberta autonomy, especially if legislation from Ottawa negatively impacts with our natural resources. That's according to Josh Andrus with Project Confederation. He explains in an interview with BCN's Naveen Day shortly. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Even with summer in full swing, the politics of Alberta and Canada continue to march on. There have been a lot of developments recently with Canadian censorship and the Liberal government wanting to keep their coalition alive as well. Then there's the ideology of the current federal Liberals and the reaction from the business world and Canadians themselves. To talk more about Alberta and the nation of Canada, we are joined by Josh Andrus. He is the Executive Director of Project Confederation. Josh, it's great to have you back.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Now, thinking of the recent Sustainable Jobs Bill, or Just Transition as it was previously called, do you see any steps that the current Canadian government taking to address the concerns and grievances of Albertans regarding the province's role in the national economy?
To put it bluntly, no. I mean, this has been an issue since the federal Liberals were elected in 2015. They brought in a tanker ban, immediately banning all exports of oil effectively off the coast of northern BC. They've brought in the Impact Assessment Act, otherwise known as the No More Pipelines Law, which is actually more encompassing than that. It effectively gives the Liberals final veto power on major projects, not just on energy, but it could be a gravel pit in Stettler. This is being challenged in the Supreme Court by the Alberta government with 8 other provinces intervening on Alberta's behalf. The federal government has zero support from the provinces on this. The Sustainable Jobs Act is just another step in the direction of completely dismantling Western Canada's energy sector. There aren't policies coming in to limit the number of cars on Ontario freeways. There aren't policies coming in to limit the ability of some of these, like a Quebec Concrete company, from polluting the St. Lawrence. They're bringing in legislation that's directly targeting Alberta and Saskatchewan, and I think it's specifically because we don't vote Liberal. The Sustainable Jobs Plan there was a leaked memo from a Blacklock's reporter obtained it from the internal government memo that said Alberta will lose 187,000 jobs if the federal government moves forward with the Sustainable Jobs Act. They've now renamed what was called the Just Transition. They can't even use the terminology because of the negative connotations that comes with economic development in even a developed country as Canada, where we bring in a policy that's effectively going to drive costs up. Not only are they bringing in these policies designed to attack our industries, they've also extended the equalization formula for an additional 5 years in a recent Ways and Means motion. It was a 400-page document. The equalization renewal was 198 pages in. It was barely noticed. It's one of those things where we're happy to contribute to the development of the rest of the country, but we need to be free to do it. And if we're not free to do it, then why are we helping? I think that's really the basis of the frustration here. So no, the federal government does not care. We had a referendum in Alberta to eliminate equalization from the Constitution, eliminate the principle of it from the Constitution. It was supposed to trigger some kind of a negotiation. Not only has the federal government ignored it, they have actually extended the formula for an additional 5 years without consultation from the provinces. Finance Minister Nate Horner was on record saying that this is unacceptable. So this is something that is going to be an overarching issue through the summer as we head into the legislative session in the fall. It's going to be very interesting to see how fast the Liberals move on the Sustainable Jobs Act, especially given the pushback from primarily Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Now, you mentioned equalization as well as the Sustainable Jobs Bill, and a lot of oil and gas revenues pay for a lot of needs that Canadians have. So, in your opinion, do you think that there's a plan or idea of how Canada can make up the revenue shortfall if Canadian oil and gas sector was deleted?
No, I think this is poorly thought out. I think this is going to lead to job losses across the country. I mean, the energy industry, you have to remember, is the industry that powers every other industry. Without affordable energy, we can't have economic development. We actually could see the economy move backwards. Energy, because of its influence in price mechanisms. I mean, every product that you use is uses energy at when it's being produced, when it's being built, when it's being transported, and then when it's on the shelf at your grocery store or the store it's purchased at needs electricity to run. So by increasing energy costs across the economy, it's going to increase prices. And if you see that combined with increasing unemployment, it's going to lead to a deep recession across the country. I don't think this is well thought out. I think this is absolutely terrible policy coming out of the federal government, but it's nothing new. We've seen this before. It's been going on for the past 7-8 years here since the Liberals were elected. So it's going to be something that we're keeping an eye on for sure. Right now, Alberta's economy is the strongest in the country. Our immigration is the strongest it's been since 1914. We've seen the population grow. So we're in a unique position where we currently are doing okay, but to see the federal government plan on bringing in policies that, according to internal government memos, are going to phase out 187,000 jobs. That's going to have a devastating impact across this province, and I think it's going to enhance an already simmering cauldron of Western alienation.
Now, we've talked about revenue, but also the workforce, too, would be impacted, because we need to remember that removing Canada's oil and gas industry will affect airline pilots and camp workers, cooks, bus drivers, mechanics, janitorial, maintenance staff. Like, the list just goes on and on and on. It seems endless that the ramifications of the Sustainable Jobs Bill will affect, like, every sector of the Canadian economy. So do you think the government has really thought this through?
No, I mean, obviously not. I mean, this is based on sound economic theory, too. I mean, we're seeing aggressive policy pushes. Canada, as a net contributor to, as a contributor to CO2 conditions, we're a carbon sink. We've got lots of trees. Our energy industry is ethical. We're moving towards carbon capture technology, but they're pushing ahead before the technology's there to actually combat it. Not to mention, we're seeing other jurisdictions like China and India increase the amount of coal-fired plants. Like, to me, we've got a government that's acting ideologically without really analyzing the impacts that we have, that's doing something to be able to say it's doing something. And we haven't even seen, like, how much of an impact it's going to have when you have two of the world's largest economies and populations bringing in coal-fired plants. Like, to me, it's short-sighted and foolish, and it's going to have devastating consequences for the Canadian economy.
Now, one of the frustrations that Albertans have is they feel that Ottawa is making decisions that benefit Ontario and Quebec, but definitely not Alberta. So what specific policy or constitutional changes does Project Confederation advocate for to enhance Alberta's influence and autonomy within Canada? And how do you envision these changes positively impacting the province and its residents?
Well, first of all, we need free trade across the country. I mean, that's something that is supposed to be enshrined in the Constitution. Section 121 reads, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm paraphrasing, but it effectively gives each province the ability to trade freely with another province. However, we've seen an activist Supreme Court, which is a common story throughout Canada's history, effectively rule against that, where they're giving the provinces the ability to block trade. We'd like to see clarification on the constitutional clause that gives free trade. I mean, do we have free trade or do we not? A second one is the ending of the equalization program. We think that it needs to be abolished. We think that it creates almost a welfare trap in some of the have-not provinces where they're reliant on revenues from the rest of the country to stay afloat and don't incentivize economic activity. Like a fishery or something like that off the coast of maybe Newfoundland, or an oil refinery somewhere in Eastern Canada, right? Like, so we're at the point where these are two absolutely awful policies they're contributing to economic, weakness across the country. Not to mention, we have, like, for example, employment insurance. Alberta, through the 2015 to 2020 recession, give or take a year, we contributed every single year, even though our unemployment rates were the highest in the country. We are still a net contributor to unemployment. So that needs to be changed. We need to opt out of certain federal programs in exchange for tax points. I think the Alberta government could do a really good job of providing some of the services that are constitutionally in our jurisdiction, but are being run by the federal government based on conditional transfers. So if we opt out of the conditional transfers and get tax points instead, it gives our tax base the ability to provincially raise the revenue here and provide the services, which I think we can do better at a local level than the federal government can.
And collaboration and partnerships between provinces are crucial for Canada's success. So how does Project Confederation envision leveraging interprovincial relationships and fostering cooperation between Alberta and other provinces to address common challenges and achieve our shared objectives?
Well, it's interesting because as the federal government has centralized political control, we've seen provinces push back. Like right now, we're seeing it with in the Maritimes, for example. Atlantic Canada is standing up to the climate agenda because, again, it is about their ability to raise revenues internally. It is about their ability to provide good economic conditions for investors and job creators so that they can build the economy. We're seeing BC start to push back against certain areas in healthcare, right? Ontario has almost liberalized the use of the notwithstanding clause against the Prime Minister's wishes. So what you're seeing is pushback from provinces across the country, and you're starting to see collaboration at premiers meetings. There was one earlier this month late last month where Premier Danielle Smith met with all the other premiers, and there does seem to be a great degree of interest in collaboration. I think that's a great starting point to start to have the discussions that we need around how this country works, because the federal government is not only doing a bad job of delivering policy, but it's also centralizing control and taking away jurisdictional control from the provinces. And I think that's an issue that most provinces are starting to realize is something they're not just going to have to keep an eye on, but they're going to have to get actual changes for.
And do you feel that there are specific strategies that will be effective in garnering public support and promoting constructive dialogue on Alberta's role within Canada?
I think the government's done a good job of advocating on behalf of what Canada wants. And I do think that part of the reason that our migration patterns over the last year are so extensively in Alberta's favor, where we're seeing inflows from other provinces, is that the government's done a good job of actively building an economy that creates jobs. I think that's something that other provinces are realizing as their people are leaving, that they should probably start to focus on. And I think that part of the issue is, like, I think that provinces are wanting to see more decentralization, that they want more control. And I think that's something that if we're focused on collaboration, focusing on the idea of decentralized control and giving provinces more autonomy over their own jurisdiction is something that is catching on. I mean, it's always been something that Quebec wants. I mean, we've got an ally right there. Ontario is pushing back on federal centralization. The Maritimes are pushing back. I think decentralization and provincial autonomy over their own issues, over their own constitutional jurisdiction, is something that's going to be a uniting factor as we move forward, especially in the wake of the just transition and some other federal policies that are just going to drive costs up on consumers.
So Josh, you mentioned Quebec, and when you think of Quebecers and Albertans, you don't necessarily think of them being the best of friends. But tell me, Josh, what have you heard from Quebec on Alberta's increasing desire for autonomy? Are they supportive of it?
So I haven't seen any comments directly from the Quebec government, but I do know that Francois Legault has been pushing for a much more autonomous agenda in Quebec on cultural issues. I mean, Alberta is more of an economic focused kind of a push, but Quebec does have a unique culture. I don't think anybody's going to deny that. He did that because he wanted to kill off the Parti Québécois. Now, he failed to do so. The Parti Québécois won a handful of seats in the most recent Quebec general election and have been rattling the cages of Legault from inside the Quebec National Assembly. They refuse to swear allegiance to the king, which is constitutionally mandated in the Constitution. They've been pushing for more reforms. Now, I go to conferences across the country, and I do talk to people from Quebec, political activists from Quebec. And most of them come up to me and say, man, I love what you guys are doing in Alberta. Like, you guys are basically following the Quebec agenda. They call it sovereignty association. They want to be a part of the country, but they also want sovereign control over their own constitutional jurisdiction, which is exactly what Alberta is pushing for. And I think you're going to start to see that that narrative tie the two provinces together, especially if we get to a constitutional negotiation where we do want to see certain powers that the federal government have passed back to the provinces. Employment insurance, like I mentioned earlier, is an area that Quebec has been pushing for. They even went so far as to create their own parental leave agency where they, with an agreement with the federal government, have control over parental leave in the province. So that's an idea that Alberta is potentially exploring, where we do have a lot of overlap in our policy agendas. And it's very interesting. Yeah, there is some frustration in Alberta towards Quebec, especially over equalization. But I think there's an appetite in Quebec to see equalization payments decrease in exchange for more autonomy over their own provinces, over their own affairs.
But all we've talked about today, it really does boil down to vision and leadership. So tell me, Josh, who do you think Canada's next Preston Manning is?
So I had to think about this. I don't think there's any single individual that is going to be the next Preston Manning. I think the power that we have now is that there's a lot of voices at the table. It's not just Danielle Smith. It's not just Scott Moe. You've got Doug Ford. You've even got Francois Legault talking about more provincial autonomy. You've got a very, like, it's coming from everywhere. And I think the more voices that we have on this issue, the better. I also think that part of the reason that we didn't succeed with reform in getting some of the changes we needed is because we tried to build it in a political party, a federal political party, and the provinces weren't really engaged in that. And I think that led to some issues. So I think that the approach that we're taking by having it come from the provinces is really the key here. If we focus on it, trying to change things within the federal Conservative Party or within a reform, or creating a reform party, I think that creates issues where you almost end up with a Liberal government for longer. I think pushing back from the provinces, especially when the federal government does have such a strong centralization ideology, really. I mean, they want control. I think that's really where the change is going to be. So, like I said, I don't know if anybody's going to be the next Preston Manning, but I think that the strength that we have now is in our numbers. And as our numbers grow, we're going to get much more pressure on the federal government, pressure on the constitutional structure of the country. And if we get that, we can actually sit down and have a strong discussion about what changes we want.
Well, Josh, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. That was great.
With the arrival of summer, many of us look forward to summer camps for our kids. But then again, there are also many who have never had the opportunity to attend a summer camp. Joining me to talk about what the benefits of summer camps can be is Mason Unruh. He's the registrar at Crow's Nest Lake Bible Camp, also known as Crow Camp. Mason, welcome to Bridge City News.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Great. So tell us a little bit about Crow's Nest Lake Bible Camp. Where are you located and what are you all about?
Yeah, so our camp is located just east of Coleman on Highway 3 and just before the BC border. And we're right in the middle of the Canadian Rockies. So it's a pretty ideal spot for a summer camp. And Crow's Nest Lake Bible Camp, it's a faith-based camp. And our whole goal is discipleship and running world-class outdoor programs. And so the combination of being based in the mountains and in a beautiful region, it really helps with guiding youth into new places that they maybe haven't been before, and helping them explore maybe some deeper questions about who they are and maybe what they're here for.
Now, how would someone go about to get their children registered for summer camp? Like, is it already too late for the 2023 year, or should parents be looking at registering for next summer already?
Yeah, so a lot of our camps are full, but there are still some openings. You can go onto our website, crowcamp.ca, and you'll be able to see all the different camps that are available and which one might suit your kids best. And then you can go through the registration process there. And it's hopefully pretty seamless.
And what happens at summer camp for those who have never been to one?
Yeah, I remember my first time going to summer camp and just kind of being just surprised at how much goes on in a day, but also just the time flies by so quickly. So a typical day would start with breakfast, getting to know all the other campers, your cabin leaders, all the other volunteers. Then there's some games, some chapel time, then some skills. At Crow Camp, we do rock climbing, archery, canoeing, and then there's some free time and some time to just hang out, get to know people, make good friends, and that's kind of how the camp goes.
Now, your camp is obviously a Christian camp, but I understand that you get quite a number of non-Christian campers as well.
Yeah, we definitely are open to everyone coming, regardless of your background or belief. Our main goal doesn't discriminate from who attends, uh, and due to that, really unique relationships and friendships are made because of it.
So with non-Christians attending with Christians, there must be lots of opportunities to share the gospel, either like peer to peer or even like staff to a non-Christian attendee of these camps. So do you have any stories of lives being changed?
Yeah, I don't think there's a day that you can go by without hearing the gospel in one way or another, and just the story of Jesus has changed a lot of lives who have come to Crow Camp. And I can just think of my own personal experience with camp, having grown up going to camp, and just really gaining a deeper understanding of what it means to follow Jesus and to shape your life in a way that resembles his. And I think that same story is shared by almost a lot of the kids who attend the camp.
And so for these young campers whose lives have been changed, have you heard any praise reports or testimonies of these young campers going on to spread that good news to other members of their family?
Yeah, I haven't heard specific stories, but I know that it would be hard to not share your experience of camp once you go home. If you come to camp and you have an amazing experience, you want to share that with everyone. And so I can imagine that message spreads not only to the family, but to the community, to their classroom, and throughout the year. That story just continues to grow and become a more prominent aspect of each camper's life until they come back in the following years, hopefully.
Now, other than spiritual growth, what are some of the other benefits of summer camp? Do you find that kids become a bit more independent and mature?
Yeah, that definitely happens. Some of our programming, of course, it'll push people out of their comfort zones, and this is, I think, a really key way for growth. And so, one of the big programs we run are backcountry out trips, and through this, there's a trained outdoor leader who has all their certificates, very qualified, and they take a group out into the forest and they stay overnight there for one night or up to 8 nights. And a lot of kids, this is their first time, and it's in an environment that they're not familiar with, maybe with people that they don't know super closely, and because of that, there's support and there's staff and there's a network of people that are all supporting these young kids and youth to go out and explore and build skills that they've never practiced. And so I don't know. I think that most who go through that experience come back feeling a lot more confident and well equipped to go back home to face some of their daily challenges that they may have. They've been in the wilderness. They've survived that. They've felt the love of a community that has gathered around them to be able to support them. And through that, hopefully that continues through the rest of their weeks and days.
You know, reflecting back on my first time at camp, when I came back, I definitely felt a greater sense of maturity, and I felt more ready to take on more responsibility. So I can definitely relate to that. But speaking of my first time at camp, I was telling you just before this interview started, I went to camp and I was gone for 3 weeks. Within the first week, I was in tears and I was calling my mom up, begging her to come back home because I'd missed home. I was in an unfamiliar place. I just wanted to come home. My mom ended up calling the camp, and they said, "Oh no, we get this all the time. Just wait until the second week. He'll have so much fun. He won't want to come home." And that surely was the case for me because I really didn't want to come home after the first week. Do you sometimes get kids who end up getting scared and missing their parents? And how do you handle stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a relatable story. Like being a young kid and the first time at camp, and there's so many new people, a different group setting, your normal support isn't around. And so, yeah, homesickness is definitely a very real part of camp. Uh, but what we try to do is we acknowledge that they are going through something challenging, and then we try to support them through it, whether that be taking their mind off of it, maybe again letting them have that call home just to settle some of those nerves. But we find that, yeah, like you said, after enough time, they're integrated into their cabin community, into the greater community at camp, and they're too busy having fun and distracted to be missing home. So our biggest goal is to make camp a place that they want to be at.
Now, let's talk about self-esteem. Do you see some changes in this area after camp? Some of these kids may be coming into camp with low self-esteem, especially if they're like in an environment where there's a lot of bullying in their school. So what do you see with children coming in, and then what changes do you see after they leave the camp or when they leave the camp?
Yeah. Yeah, so all the skills and programs that our camp runs, I think are phenomenal opportunities for youth to develop self-esteem. We have things like rock climbing, where it might be they start and they can't even hold onto the wall, and by the end of the week they're reaching the top of it. Or archery, where they're missing the targeting entirely, and then they are hitting the bullseye. And and this is all supported through staff who want to see young people succeed, and who are helping develop that personal self-esteem that some people are lacking, or maybe just don't receive in their home setting. And and our staff and volunteers are very cognizant of how can we support those who maybe are less confident into becoming more confident, and growing to push themselves to areas where they may not succeed at first, but because they have confidence and self-esteem, they're able to grow in various skills.
Now, how do you raise funds for a camp that offers free camping? Like, and how can someone get involved who wants to support you financially?
Yeah, so since 1956, the camp has been all by donations. There's thousands of extremely generous donors, and these donors are maybe people who have attended camp, or maybe their kids attended camp, or their grandkids attended camp, or maybe they just heard about it and they see the good things that are happening there, and they want to partner with Crow to see it flourish. And so the reason that we can run camp fee free is because of the generosity of so many other people that are joining in this mission to share the gospel with young people, and share the outdoors with them. So it's just very generous people, and if people want to join us in that, they can go to the website, where there's all kinds of different ways to donate online, or they can even come visit the camp and drop off donations that way. So however people would like to donate, we'll accommodate that.
And then you briefly touched upon the sports and activities that are offered. Why don't you just go over what sports and activities the kids go through, and then are there any plans to add more?
Yeah, so currently we're running the skills that we have are rock climbing, canoeing, and archery. And so each camper will get an opportunity to try those skills. And then a big part of camp are the out trips. And like I mentioned before, those can vary in length, but that's when they go into the backcountry and they're able to experience an overnight camping trip in the wilderness, but then also practice some of those outdoor survival skills, maybe that we went over at camp, like knot tying or fire starting. So there's a wide variety of different skills and programs that we run. Currently, these are the ones that we're really focusing on. So they've been improving year after year, and we're going to keep growing those.
And obviously, you couldn't pull this off without the need of volunteers. So, how are you staffed, and is there a need for volunteers to help out this summer?
Yeah, so we have a handful of full-time staff, but then yeah, you're right. We couldn't run camp without the volunteers we have, and um, we have a lot already, but there's still a need for more camps later on into the summer, into August. And so if people are interested in volunteering, they can, again, go to the website. They'll be able to see where volunteer needs are, and that's crowcamp.ca. And then if they want to get a hold of our volunteer coordinator directly, they can email volunteer@crowcamp.ca.
Any final thoughts for anyone still considering going to a summer camp this year? And what would you say to parents who might be hesitant to send their kids out of fears that their child might be too scared? Or maybe it's the parent that is scared.
Yeah, I'd have to say I recommend camp to everyone. I'm maybe a little biased, but I'm only speaking from my experience of having grown up going to camp and seeing its impact on my life, and as well as the lives of everyone that I went to camp with. There's a lot of positive stories from there, a lot of good relationships. I have some of my best friends that I've still keep in contact with from camp. And as for anyone who's a little bit hesitant, I think the thing I would say is we need to step out of our comfort zone sometimes in order to find that growth, in order to get past what's uncomfortable and see where our full potential might be. And also, when we do this, we're able to look back and maybe see the person that we were before this time of going to camp and who we are afterwards. So for any kids who are hesitant, you'll have a great time. You can make lifelong friendships there. And any for parents who are concerned about their kids, know that there's a supportive network of people there who genuinely care for their well-being and want to see the best for them.
Mason Unruh is the registrar at Crow's Nest Lake Bible Camp. Mason, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.